Come on, let's go. You know karate. Cobra Kai? You work for Kreese.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on your show.
Yeah, man, I was super psyched, and like I've wanted to talk to you forever, and we finally made it happen, and we're here. Let's do it.
And you dug up an old picture of me from 1989 to the bottom here. It's you made this very nice. It's very, very, very cool. So thank you.
Yeah, I mean, the least I could do. I mean, you giving me your time and your beautiful, studio here, so I might as well, make it worthwhile for you, and hopefully the questions make it absolutely worthwhile. So thank you for that.
We'll have a wonderful conversation. And the thing is that the lighting in here is kind of like, it's not the best, but it's okay. And it washes me out a little bit. Usually I like to have a little bit of like, feel like key lighting it. But you know what? This is me. And we'll have a great conversation regardless. So.
Yeah, it's also a big part of who you are. And is that a Wu-Tang shirt? It's really cool.
Oh, yeah. This is the...
Oh, that is really cool. I like it.
I got one that also is kind of a knockoff where it's got Bruce Lee on it, but also the Wu-Tang symbol behind there. And he's going like this. So, I had to wear the Wu-Tang shirt today because, well, it's you. So, what better shirt to wear on the Derek Thomas show? So,
I have a very goofy question to ask you to start it. So,
okay, are we recording already?
We are recording, but I'll chop out some of the beginning stuff like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So, So on the internet, there's this big thing going on. Like everybody's talking about it. It is so silly. It's so foolish. It is the debate of 100 men versus a gorilla and who would win. You being a fifth degree black belt, like I figure you can shed some light on this more than the average person.
I've been seeing stuff like that, and I didn't know what to make of it. I thought it was just like a joke thing, but I've been seeing these videos with dudes dressed up in gorilla costumes, and
people are like serious, like really debating, like, oh no, the gorilla would win. Oh, it depends who the guys are. Well, it's like if they're going back and forth, like this is like actually going to happen.
I'm going to put my money on the gorilla.
Me too.
I think the gorilla is going to tear apart the first couple of dudes, and the rest of them might kind of go, wait a second, maybe this is not such a good idea. And the 100 men that started out may end up being 10, and then I think those guys are going to get tore up. So, money's on the gorilla. I mean, if you haven't seen how powerful those creatures are, and they've got sharp teeth, and everybody thinks of like, it's just a monkey. It's just, like this. But those creatures are just insanely strong. And I think they'll mess you up. Definitely one-on-one. I'm not having no part of any gorilla. And I think even if I had 99 buddies with me, I think the gorilla is going to win.
Yeah. Let's make it interesting. Let's use a polar bear. Let's see how that goes out too.
Oh,
so, yeah, it's crazy. Yeah. So how long did it take you to become a fifth degree black belt? What's that process for you, William? That's a long time, I have to imagine.
You know what? Okay, so I started karate when I was about 7 years old, and there was a kid from school named Joseph Hiraoka, and I recently tracked him down. He's actually a civil rights attorney in New York, and I tracked him down through LinkedIn through his sister, and we've kind of reconnected. He's a kid who said, hey, I just started taking karate, and you need to do it too. And he said, yeah, he was a good guy, but he goes, hey, you're getting a little chubby there, and I just joined karate. I think you'll benefit from it. And I was just like, okay, that sounds good. And that's kind of how my karate journey started. And eventually, I stuck with it. I wanted to quit, but my mom wouldn't let me. She basically said, hey, you know what? You're a brown belt. Why don't you at least get your black belt, and then you can quit. And by that time, I got a chance to discover Bruce Lee. We went to there was a screening of a movie called The Game of Death that was showing in Hollywood. And I'd never seen a Bruce Lee movie prior to that, but our dojo got invited down, and you got to get in free as long as you wore your uniform. So we went down there, and I wasn't sure what the big deal was, but Bruce Lee's son Brandon was there, very young Brandon Lee, his sister Shannon, his wife, and all these different martial arts schools, went to this event. And when we got in there, it was just really cool. I said, oh, this is cool. My mom's buying me popcorn and a drink and, a cool movie. The lights go down and the place goes nuts. And people are actually taking flash photography of the screen as Bruce Lee appears. Now, most of that movie was, this is, obviously before CGI and all this. So they used the double, and they actually like took Bruce's face from another movie and they kind of pasted it on somebody else's body. And it was just, as a kid, I didn't notice, but as an adult, I'm going, man, that movie was awful. But it was still instrumental for me because I got a chance to see the lost footage of Bruce Lee in his yellow tracksuit. And I had never seen anybody move like that before. And I was so inspired that I ended up not quitting karate. I wanted to be like Bruce. And then I started getting good at it. And then, when you get good at something, you like it more. When you like it more, you practice more. When you practice more, you get better, and so on and so forth. And I ended up sticking with it. So, I went up for my first degree black belt, failed it the first time. And then 3 months later, I retested and then I passed. And then, I just kind of kept going. And then I got to third degree under my senseis, Sensei Richard Rabago and his master, Tadashi Yamashita. And then I went 18 years without getting any rank and without any interest of getting rank. And part of that was because, I kind of started doing my own thing and, teaching in places and, kind of just trying to earn a living. And I was never concerned about rank, and then, when I would go in there, they would be like, hey, don't you think it's time that, you level up and you want to, it's time for you to get promoted. And I'm like, I'm not really interested in that. And so I kind of went from 18 years of being a third degree and being happy at that. And then when I was training with my sensei, Master Tadashi Yamashita, for a long time, he kind of forced it on me. He said, no, you're fifth degree, you go down. So, and I was like, okay, Sensei, I'll wear it. And then I've been a fifth degree since about 2004, 2005. And I don't have any interest in going up in rank anymore, but I'm very interested in continuing to be a student of the martial arts and continuing to improve myself and pass on knowledge so that I can help other people empower themselves. That's what it's all about for me.
Yeah, very cool. Did you see Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, William?
You know what? That's the Brad Pitt, the Quentin Tarantino movie, and the Bruce Lee thing. I've only seen the clip of Bruce Lee.
Yeah.
I haven't seen the entire movie yet. I've seen a handful of Quentin's movies, like some of them not as much, but I haven't seen that one.
Okay, I was going to ask you if you thought they disrespected Bruce Lee by making him coming across as arrogant and just this guy that thinks he can kick everyone's ass, when I feel like that's just the exact opposite of who this man was as a human being. But
I don't know. I never met him. I wish I was too young. By the time I started karate, Bruce had already passed.
Yeah.
He's accomplished so much, and he's done so much to inspire so many people across the globe. And at the same time, he was a human being. I've heard, for what it's worth, some people who knew him said, yeah, Bruce was cocky. He was, he was arrogant, but he was also very great, but a lot of people are arrogant and cocky in this world, and, you would think that, the martial artists wouldn't be, but sometimes they're the first people to kind of, beat their own chest and toot their own horn,
Yeah.
That's kind of how it goes. But no, I haven't actually seen the movie yet, so I'm not really, I'm not in a position where I can, say one way or the other, since I have.
Gotcha. So I have one question that I want to kind of hop into your career. So I have 2 young kids and I really want to start them in the martial arts, right? This is a selfish question for me.
Okay.
You talked about passing along knowledge. One is 2 years old, one is 4 years old. How would you recommend to me? What would you tell me about how to introduce them? Because I feel like martial arts isn't just about defending yourself, right? It's a spectrum of these wonderful things that it gives you, right? Confidence and working with people and learning and listening. So like, how would you, for father to father, how would you tell me to introduce them into martial arts? What should I do? What should I look for? Maybe there's parents watching this that have kids who are wondering the same thing.
Well, I think they're pretty young, but some studios will start you at 4.
Wow.
I think 2 is really young, but sometimes, and sometimes if you find a good studio with an instructor that resonates with you, then sometimes getting one started and having the other one watch for a while, the younger one just kind of picks it up through just being around it and being exposed to it, and then maybe wanting to be like the older one,
Yeah.
And sometimes the younger one becomes better than the older one, just because they've been around it a little bit more longer, a little longer,
Right.
and able to absorb it. I would definitely visit schools and see, okay, this seems like a good instructor and a good school. Is it a good fit for me and my kids? And then go from there. And if you have to wait a little bit, that's fine. And then also, if there are any movies that have martial arts in them that are geared for kids that you think might be, I mean, I think the Kung Fu Panda movies is kind of a cliche, but I love those movies.
Yeah.
I love the Ninja Turtles. I think just to see the various incarnations of them, over the decades, how they've evolved. There's like there's sometimes it's a little darker. It might be for older kids, but like Raya and the Last Dragon has a lot of great martial arts in it. Mulan, and some people think, well, these are more girl movies, but there's if you look at the original Mulan, the cartoon version, some of the martial arts is really solid there. Yeah, finding stuff like that that's super kid friendly, and then maybe going from there, and then when they're a little bit older, maybe the original Karate Kid movie, that might be a good one.
Yeah. That's happening. That's happening. And then we'll move on to 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll move on to the Cobra Kai universe.
Right.
It's a funny thing, because speaking of Karate Kid, it comes out in the third one comes out in 1989, right?
Correct.
And you make the most of your minutes. It's so great to see you in it, and to see you come back again. It was just such a wonderful thing. The funny thing about movies, though, it's so bittersweet. The last year of the 80s, it's like you start thinking about the movie, and then about all the stuff that you went through as a human being in 1989, right? So it's like, it's so wonderful that you have these memories of the movie, but movies are markers for your life in a lot of ways, right? You have the memories of the movie, who you went with, things that were happening. That's what's so special about the movies. But do you see it that way too, William? Like you go through this amazing, we're gonna get to how you got this role and stuff, but do you view movies that way, like the time period, the year, who you went with, like the memories you have? Do you see it that way too?
Okay, so in 1977, I saw this little film called Star Wars.
Oh yeah.
In the theater. It wasn't even called Episode 4: A New Hope. It was just Star Wars. And my friend from school, Brian Johnson, he had said, "Hey, have you seen Star Wars yet?" And I said, "No, I've only read the first 2 issues of the Marvel comics." So his mom and dad were kind enough to take me, and they had already seen it. And I got to experience my very first movie in a movie theater, and it was Star Wars. And that movie was the inspiration for me wanting to be in films. And I wanted to be Han Solo, and I wanted to have a ship like the Millennium Falcon. And I just thought, this is amazing. And then when I got exposed to Game of Death and then later Enter the Dragon, I was like, I want to be like this dude. So my 2 heroes growing up were Harrison Ford and Bruce Lee. And huge inspiration for me. But I can distinctly remember being in the movie theater. I think it was in Torrance, and I think it was at a place called the Man Theaters, which is now it's not there anymore. I think the UFC gym is there now.
Right.
I do remember having that experience, and it was life-changing for me.
Yeah. And John Avildsen says to you, he basically picked you out and said, hey, like he gave you a shot, which is like he personally picked you. Do I have that part of it right?
Well, he did and he didn't. At first he didn't, like as I've told the story a few times, but I was taken down to my friend Rich Cancino, who I'm still really good buddies with. He says, dude, they're doing a casting call for Karate Kid. They're looking for a villain. Let's go. So we get in his yellow Camaro. We go down there. And then as we turn the corner, it's like, wow, there's 1,000 people in line. And that has this effect on us where we go, oh, we get out of the car. We went in line. I have my picture and resume. And John comes out with his cameraman. It was actually Clifford Coleman, who was the first AD. They start going down the line and just dismissing people. And he's like, thank you very much. Thank you, Frank. And then he starts slowing down when he's getting closer to me, and I don't even want to look at John. And my buddy's like elbowing me, going, dude, I think he's gonna come over here. And sure enough, John comes over and he says, hi, what's your name? And I tell him my name. He goes, how old are you? I'm 22 years old, sir. And he says, you look a little old to be in. We're kind of like looking for somebody who could still be in high school, And I had short hair at the time. Like, oh, really, sir? Well, can I still give him a picture and resume? And he's like, oh yeah, absolutely. So that was a win for me. A week later, his casting director, Caro Jones, calls me and says, hey, we haven't cast the part of Mike Barnes yet. We'd like you to come down and read. So I get a chance to do that. And I had zero acting experience at the time. And I probably was one of the worst auditioners that she had, but she was a very nice lady and said, that was very good. Thank you very much. And, I was like, yeah, I nailed it. I got this. And then, weeks go by and you're just going to go back to being depressed. It's like, oh, get it. So then it's around December 4th or 5th. And I'd read in the Variety that production was going to start around that time. So I was like, well, if I haven't been called yet, then I know I didn't get it. Around that time, I get a call from Caro Jones, leaves a voice message on my answering machine and says, hey, this is Caro. Give me a call back. Hey, you know what? Mike Barnes has been cast, but we need somebody else to play one of his henchmen. Can you come down and, John wants to see you again. And you're going to meet with Pat Johnson and, oh, great. So I went down to Burbank. I show up. I'm waiting around. Fumio Demura is there. He's the stunt double for Pat Morita. He was a mentor of mine, real karate guy. And he goes, hey, what are you doing here? And I said, oh, Sensei, I'm here to, there might be a part for me. And he goes, oh, okay. And then Ralph walks in, Ralph Macchio. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, that's Ralph Macchio. And, he comes up to me and goes, hey man, what's going on? I'm Ralph. And I'm like, yes, I know. And then finally John shows up. They bring him over to me and he's like, oh, okay. Yeah, we kind of need another guy. How old are you? He's 22 years old, sir. He goes, yeah, you look young enough. And then Sensei Demura, he was always very supportive. And he goes, hey, John, this kid, he's okay. No worry. John's like, good enough for Sensei, good enough for me.
Yeah.
That's how, and I remember Clifford Coleman says, all right, get him Taft Hartley. Let's get him into SAG and, let's get to work. We got a movie to make. And it was surreal to me at that time, Derek. I was just like, it's really happening. And that's how I got into the movie. And it was a fun 3 months being on set.
Yeah, and who would have guessed, and you made the most of your minutes. Who would have guessed that Dennis is going to last all these years, right? Who would have guessed?
Well, listen, man, I had no idea. For 35 years, it's been, they say an actor's life is feast and famine. And for me, it was a lot of famine.
Yeah.
And I was getting like, hey, Cobra Kai, have you seen it? I'm like, no, I haven't seen it. What is this? This is like, what is this? I don't want to watch this. And then, you watch it and you're going, hey, this is pretty good, right? Yeah. And then there was season 2 and then season 3. And then people keep asking me, they're like, hey, they're mentioning Terry Silver. They're hinting about, Mike Barnes. You're going to be in it, right? And I'm like, no, I don't think so. I haven't gotten the call yet. And, and then all the way up until season 5 is done. And people are still asking me, wow, there was a little clip of you when they introduced Mike Barnes. You're going to be in it, right? And I'm like, honestly, I don't think so. And it was like being invited to a party. It's like, hey, you're going to be at the party, right? No, I haven't been invited to this fun party yet. And it's kind of like, stop asking me. I don't know. And then I had this weird dream. Season 6, there was a strike. Season 6 started. And, it's like, oh, if I haven't heard by now, then I'm not going to be in it for sure. It's the same as like when I was originally cast in Karate Kid 3. It was like,
Right.
well, if I haven't heard by now, then I'm not going to be in it.
Right.
And so, strangely enough, I have this dream, and I dream that I'm in this very dojo, and I'm cleaning up, and I'm moving chairs, and this cobra appears, and it lifts up, flips its hood, hisses at me, and I'm not freaking out, but I'm kind of like, oh no, there's a cobra in the dojo, and what am I going to do? There's 5 minutes, and the kids are going to be here, in my dream. And then I call my wife and I say, hey, hon, you're not going to believe this. There's a cobra in the dojo. She's like, what? I'm like, no worries, but I called the veterinarian. They're going to send over a mongoose. And she's like, wait, what? No, I got this. We're good. And then I woke up. And I was like, whoa, that was a weird fever dream. So I go and get my coffee. And then I noticed I have a message on Facebook from Josh Heald. And I was like, oh. And he says, hey, I've got a question for you about karate. Do you mind if I email you from my personal email address? Like, sure, Josh. And he, I'm thinking he's going to ask me a question about, something technical or something, and it's like, hey, we're in the writer's room and we figured out kind of a clever, fun way to bring your character of Dennis back. You interested in acting again? And I'm like, yeah, what is it? What does it entail? And they said, well, basically, you still work for Silver. You're still a bad guy. I'm in, I'm like, I'm still a bad guy. I still work for Terry Silver. Sign me up. And he goes, oh yeah, it's fun. And, you get to fight Ralph and, the things that you do to him, it's like, which turns out to be like the kidnapping. I'm behind all that and all that stuff.
Right.
And all this time I'm thinking this is kind of an elaborate prank, right? And finally, they're sending me script sides. And then up until the point where I think I get on the plane going to Atlanta, I just keep thinking this is an elaborate joke. And, finally we land in Atlanta. I meet Frank the costumer, and then they send me over to the dojo, and Billy Zabka's there, and he gives me this big hug. And if you've never met Billy Zabka, the warmest, kindest, most authentic, down-to-earth human being you could ever meet. He's just just makes you feel like family. And pretty soon they start, the stunt crew. Men and women, but it's headed by Don Lee, who's the choreographer, Ken Barrington, who is the coordinator, and then all like the stunt captains. We have Craig Henningsen, who is Ralph's double, and then Tony Chung, and then there's Matt Mullins, and there's other people as well. And then they start teaching me the fight, and Ralph finally shows up, and then we're going over it with him. They film it for me on my phone, and they send it to me. And they go back to your hotel room and study this. And so by the next day, we're ready to go. And we take it piece by piece. And it was like, I am back here fighting Daniel LaRusso. And I get to do more than just getting thrown into the shoji screen. So it was pretty cool.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Let me ask you this. How great is Thomas Ian Griffith?
He's amazing. He's kept up his martial arts all this time.
Yeah.
When I first met Thomas, he showed up on set. He said, "Hey, Karate Kid 3, are you part of the cast?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he goes, "Oh, hey, I'm Thomas. I'm playing Terry." I was like, "Oh, how's it going?" We get to talking, find out about his Taekwondo background. Like we know a lot of the same people. Like the people he mentioned. I'm like going, "Oh my gosh, Philip Ree, Simon Ree, and it's like, these guys are legends." And Thomas. We never got close, but, whenever we saw each other, we always had martial arts to talk about. And I always liked being on set, watching him work. He's a consummate professional, and he's just really good at what he does. And when my reunion with him was interesting because, I'd run into Thomas a few times, in town.
Right.
Years. And one time I was after Karate Kid 3, I couldn't find a job. I couldn't get an agent. I wasn't working, so I ended up being a messenger for a company called the Go Between. And basically, what they did was that you would pick up a package somewhere, take it to somewhere else. Like you'd pick up a script, deliver it to CAA. So I was delivering something to an agency, and in walks Thomas Ian Griffith. I'm just waiting. I'm waiting for the signature. And then in walks Thomas Ian Griffith, and he's with friends. He's at the time he was producing, Executive Decision. I know, what was it? There was this action movies he was doing at the time.
Yeah. It'll come to me as you're talking.
I don't know. Executive Decision, I think, was the Kurt Russell movie with Steven Seagal.
No, but you're on the right path. Yeah, keep talking. It'll come to me.
About 2 or 3 of them, And he's going, oh, hey, how's it going? And I'm like, oh, and I was kind of embarrassed. I was almost like, oh, I hope he doesn't notice that I'm I'm working a regular job. Nothing to be embarrassed about, but I was embarrassed at the time.
Yeah.
And he was, oh yeah, we're kind of working on a new film, and so he goes into this cubicle with several seats. There's a big table. He's there with his guys, and then I'm kind of on the outside. I'm like kind of looking in, like, you know what I mean? I've kind of like got my hands on the window like this, and just watching them do this deal and talk about the movie. I can't hear anything, but I'm just like, I want to be in there, And then finally, years later, I'm on the set of the Sekai Taikai, and I knew Thomas was going to be there with a call sheet, and then all of a sudden he's like, "Hey, William, what's going on, man?" And it was like, "Hey," and it was like there was no airs, there was no pretension, he didn't big league me, Thomas he's a good dude, and he's like. He's real, if he gets along with you, he gets along with you. He's a professional. And again, Billy Zabka takes the trophy for being the warmest. Like he's the guy who, is like, hey man, you want to go to dinner and stuff like that. Yuji also. Thomas is really, really friendly, but he kind of, it's not like he and I are hanging out and being buddies and everything, but he was super nice, super professional. We talked about Taekwondo, we talked about Jiu-Jitsu, but his passion is boxing. So we talked about some of the great boxers of the 80s, Sugar Ray Leonard and Marvin Hagler and Roberto Duran and Thomas Hearns. And he goes, oh man, that was a great error, So that's how we kind of connected. And then just being able to, stand next to him and do these scenes, where it's like, I didn't get to share the screen very much with him when I did Karate Kid 3, but this time there, I'm there. We do a revisitation of the hot tub scene, and I'm there, and it was really fun just kind of hanging out with him, And,
William, as a 22-year-old kid, how does your life change being in Karate Kid 3, right? So like you, granted, I mean, listen, I've heard you say in other interviews, it wasn't a big part, but you know what? Like I said before, you made the most of your minutes on screen, which is all you can do as an actor, right? You're so convincing, you're so great. Does it change your life? Are you like, I can't believe what's going on here. I can't believe my luck. I can't believe where I am right now. What was your reaction to in 1989, 22-year-old kid on the big screen? What are you thinking?
Prior to the movie, there's this, everybody's pursuing, you want to, I want to get in, and I got to get a part. I got to get into the union, And it's like, okay, I got into the union, so I never thought I would do that. And that was a big deal. And then being a part of that big franchise was like, and seeing yourself on the screen, you're just going, wow, this is amazing. And then reality sets in that, this is not a guarantee. You're not necessarily, I thought, oh, I'm going to be getting roles all over the place. And it's like, man, it's just me and the crickets,
Yeah.
But here's the thing, it was a big accomplishment. And then I needed to learn life's lessons. There's no better sensei than life itself. So I needed to learn a lot of things over 35 years. And delays are not denials. And sometimes it's like, yeah, the old saying is true. Sometimes it takes decades to become an overnight sensation, and I'm not there, but it was really cool, being on set 35 years later. You are so appreciative of just being able to come to work, and I'm like, I'm part of this, and I get to do more. And the thing that's funny is that people go, oh my gosh, I didn't even recognize him. No, that's not the same guy. Is that the same guy? Yeah, that's the same guy. And I get a lot of comparisons to the great Danny Trejo and things like that. They're like, he looks like Machete, and I'm like, I'll take that. So what an honor and privilege, Derek, just to be asked back again, and to be kind of cemented now into the canon for sure. If there was any doubt, it's like, well, I moved the plot forward several times in Cobra Kai now, and then you find out that was the dude who burned down the furniture store, and I was so glad that they kept that, because I texted Josh one day and I said, hey, is there a possibility that Dennis was at the furniture store when it burned down? And Josh was like, yeah, dude, he's the guy that set the fire. It's like, you think Terry's going to go there himself? Who's he going to send? He's going to send his dude, So I was like, oh my gosh, this is so great. I hope that the fans get to hear this. I hope that it becomes canonized. And then we're doing that scene with Terry on the yacht. And we did it one way. And then finally, Josh comes up to me and goes, "Hey, I'm going to give you an alternate line. I want you to say this also." And then he says, "Furniture stores are one thing. You really want to go there?" He goes, "Put that in." And so I was like, yes. So, and then,
This is when he's asking you to kidnap Johnny Lawrence's wife, right? Is this? Yeah.
So Josh, he asked me to put that in day of, and I was thinking, please keep it in, please keep it in, please keep it in, and then they did.
Yeah, it's a smart line. That's a creative way to wedge that in there. That's very smart. Those guys are so smart. Like, they're so smart,
Well, it's a great way to kind of like, without hammering it, like without inserting me walking away from the fire in slow motion, which I would have loved anyways. But,
right.
It's like, and astute fans are like, he's the dude, and Sean Kanan is like, wait, Dennis burned down my furniture store, and it's funny because as I was preparing for my character, it's like I can't just stand there and be a tough guy. I've got to come up with some background. I've got to create a backstory for my character, and so I kind of presented some things and notes to Josh, and he liked a lot of them. And in fact, I was the guy who came up with the last name of De Guzman. I wrote that in my character notes.
Oh,
and
nice.
They said, hey, we like that so much that we're going to keep De Guzman. And so I'm like, well, of course he's going to have a last name. So, and Dennis De Guzman has a nice ring to it. So it's kind of nice. So I was really happy about that.
You stole my last question. Well, I have a few more, but my last question was going to be how much you look like Danny Trejo in Cobra Kai. I was like, oh my God. And it's so believable because people know Trejo as a badass and your character is kind of a badass. So there's some similarities there. And what a great guy to be compared to, right?
Well, maybe I would be lucky enough to play a younger Danny Trejo in a flashback sequence or something like that, in an actual Danny Trejo project. I've heard he's a very nice man too. I read his biography and he's been through a lot, did hard time in prison, and just turned himself around. And now he speaks, he goes to prisons and he speaks to people, and he does outreach, and, but, that's quite a compliment to get a comparison like that, But I've gotten that comment so many times. It's like, hey, it's Machete, it's Danny Trejo. So,
but you also said something really good too. You said your character drives the plot along a little bit, in your other storyline. You're right, he does. Like, your character's actions about going after Lawrence's wife is kind of what makes Kreese see the light. Where I've got to step in here. I've got to do the first non-selfish thing I've done maybe ever, and go after and save this kid that I've done wrong for 40 years. And your character was the one who was going to do it. And then Kreese kind of comes to the reality. Do you see it that way too? Do you find the same things that I'm seeing?
Well, absolutely. And, just the fact that I kidnapped him, we put him in the dog cages, we had that fight. I show up later at the cafe. They follow me. That leads them to Silver. There's just things that my character gets to do that, for one, the fans love it because it ties it back into Karate Kid 3. Dennis and Silver being together all this time. But, then Dennis having to, he finds the information, he gives Silver the envelope. And then, it's funny because then we have a little fight at the brawl and it's like, you again, which is a funny line. It's like, oh, this guy just keeps turning up. And then finally at the end where he's like, you want to go there? And it's just kind of like gives Dennis just a little bit of humanity, and that was another line that I had where he says, do this for me, do as I ask. And I say, that's very generous of you, sir. And then there's a little bit of a pause and I say, Sensei, and I bow. And that was my addition because, to me, Silver is not only my boss, he is my mentor, he is my sensei. And in my backstory, Silver saved my life when I was very young, and that's why I stuck with him for so very long.
That's smart. That's smart. Yep. That's smart. And people forget, listen, I love this show for a lot of reasons. I think it's like Star Wars. I think it connects a lot of generations of kids and adults and people. Right. I really wanted to ask you, do you think people realize that like Lawrence and characters like, Dennis and, Ralph and all these guys that we're talking about during this whole interview, those are the foundation of Cobra Kai, right? Without those guys, we have nothing. Like, my only gripe with Cobra Kai, and I love the show, so I feel like I'm not out of place by saying this. I thought the cast of kids got a little too big, right? Because there's some storylines that kind of just went poof. Like Kenny, he should have had a great send off, and it was just kind of like, Oh, he shits his pants. Let's kind of just drive him off. That I just thought. So it's two questions I'm asking you. One, do you agree with the foundation part? And two, do you agree with me saying maybe the cast got a little too big? Do you think it got a little bit too? Because I feel like, not that these characters were bad, it's just I feel like there were some stories that were not completed. And I guess this happens on The Walking Dead, other shows. Whatever you wanted to say, William, I'm not going to force you to say anything.
No. I think with a lot of times there's too many characters, and it's like you run out of time, run out of money, or it's just like it's time to close things up, and there's some loose plot ends that don't get tied up, unfortunately, and I think that does happen. Sometimes the characters, they become too big. Sometimes the characters become more popular than they originally maybe were thought they would be, and so it's like, hey, let's write another episode. With all due respect to the writers, maybe it's like, hey, let's write another scene with this character, and then maybe at the end they're going, hey, there's not enough time to wrap everything up, guys. So sometimes that's what happens. In regards to foundation, it goes back to the way they tied it up, with the whole thing about mentorship and fathers and sons, and real fathers not being present, and you see that theme over and over again, where there's surrogate father figure who is either the right influence or the wrong influence, right? But I love the way that they bring it full circle, and then John has his redemption and Johnny has his redemption, and then there's the role reversal where Ralph kind of becomes Johnny's father for a little bit, he becomes his sensei, so there's, I love that whole thing about the role reversal and everything like that, but you've got to have that relationship and emotional foundation to make it work. My favorite scenes in the show are when you have the original cast members older talking as human beings, just going, what I mean, when they were connecting, like the scene with Yuji and with Tamlin, when Chosen and Kumiko reunite, and or when Ralph and Kumiko reunite, or when Ralph and Billy actually have a real conversation where they're like, hey man, you were kind of a dick, and it's like, yeah, you were too, and you're like, yeah, we were both kind of, you know what I mean? I like that stuff. That to me, more than the fighting and more than the plot, I like the character stuff where people really kind of, you can see them connecting and friendships developing, and that's the appeal of the show for me.
And even like Ralph over Miyagi's grave, like it was early season 2 or 3 or something like that. Like it was just really moving. It was like, oh, like it's such a touch of a blast of the past. But I have to say, I saw a great clip of you. You and I have the same favorite scene, and I'm going to let you explain it. And I'm going to put the clip in the beginning of this interview when I edit it.
Okay.
Our favorite scene in Cobra Kai. You love it when Daniel is on the boat and he's getting his balance. So I'm going to let you tell people why that's your favorite, and I'm going to add on to whatever you say, because I loved your explanation when I saw it online.
Well, you go back to the original movie, there is Mr. Miyagi training Daniel, and they're out on a lake, and Daniel's on the boat, and he's trying to achieve balance, and he's standing there and he's doing his moves. And to me, the way it was shot, it was just, that to me encapsulates karate and martial arts for me, and really life, right? It's really about how do we balance, how do we balance work and play? How do we balance, the things that we want to keep and the things we have to let go of? How do we balance this, the yin and the yang, right? How do we, and that's the whole metaphor right there. And that is my very favorite scene in the entire series, including Cobra Kai, is the scene with young Daniel on the boat, just trying not to fall in the water. And if I had to pick one scene, that would be the one.
Oh, dude, I love that. And I have to say, like, even to stretch it out a little further, when he's with Miyagi on the beach and they're playing that song, Daniel Sees a Bird, where it goes, and he's kind of like, he's on top of the pier, and it's just that whole scene. It's just a relationship and rapport with these two guys. Like, they kind of save each other. Like, Miyagi's his father figure, and and Ralph is a guy that, a kid, I guess, that Miyagi needed. Like, he needed this. They needed each other. And here we are in 2025 talking all things karate, because the bond ultimately that these two had, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They save each other. That's for sure.
2 more questions, William. Thank you for all this time. I am so appreciative of it. Pat, how familiar are you with Pat Johnson?
So I had heard of Pat Johnson before getting hired, and he was very famous in the karate world. I believe he was Chuck Norris's student.
Yeah.
And I knew him from Enter the Dragon when he played one of the thugs that harasses John Saxon. And he goes, "It's the dough roper, or we gotta break something." And so it was a real treat meeting him, and I enjoyed watching him work. And sometimes, I just sit back and I'd watch and I'd learn, and he would sometimes teach lessons about martial arts. It was like we had some downtime. So one of the things he taught me was about breathing. He said, what I like to do is he breathes, and he breathes into his belly, and he likes to work those, those lower lung lobes, right? And then he brings it back up again. And he goes, yeah, most people breathe from their chest. Learn to breathe from your belly. And he says, it takes about 6 months to develop that. And I'm like, wow. And he says, yeah, but that's the key, is the deep belly breathing. And I'm like, yeah. Oh. So that was kind of the lesson that I took away from him. Yeah. And I also got a chance to work with him and Robert Mark Kamen. We kind of put together the final fight between Mike Barnes and Daniel at that tournament at the All Valley.
Yeah.
I was jumping in, and I was playing Ralph's part, and then I was playing Sean. So I was playing Daniel, and then I was playing Mike. And then it would be me and Pat Johnson working, and then switching roles, and then Robert Mark Kamen would jump in, and then Pat would look at it. And so, I didn't have anything to do with what the choreography was. I was just, kind of filling in, and that's kind of how they put the fight together. And at the time, I think they had this big old camera that they were videotaping it. It might have been like a camcorder. And I wish that footage existed somewhere. Maybe it does.
It definitely has to. Yeah, it has to.
I would love to see that footage, because I pretty much remember that they were recording that. But neither, Josh and John haven't mentioned, and Hayden, they haven't mentioned ever seeing them. So
yeah. So the reason I bring up Pat and with what you said was, he's, for those listening or watching, he's also the referee in the final fight in the first movie, right? And maybe along the lines too, but I just feel like he did so much for this whole world of ours and the Karate Kid world, and I feel like he's just very underrated. Like, this guy did a lot on the camera, behind the camera. Not that other people haven't, but man, I got to tell you, William, guys like Pat Johnson are the secret sauce behind why Karate Kid works in a lot of ways.
There's a lot of people that probably don't get as much credit as they deserve.
Correct.
And I would expand that to the stunt team,
yes,
acting, to the production assistants, wardrobe, makeup, the people who cook the food. It really does take a whole team of people to make a successful movie. And I give, props to everybody, because, everybody's got to do their job, and I don't think anybody's better than anybody else, and I don't like it when people act like they are. It's like, okay, so you're the actor, so that doesn't mean you get to treat people any less. It's respect is very important. So, I really try to be respectful and kind to everyone I meet, regardless. And it always comes back to me, so that's how I feel about that. But yeah, definitely Pat, probably underrated and underappreciated for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And I have to say, Reina, who's a martial artist in Cobra Kai, she's so great. I love this show. I think she could have beaten Miguel. I didn't love the way these accomplished martial artists both lost back to back. I was like, I would have liked to see a good fight, like almost like a Rocky 1, where everyone gave it their all, but the good guy just doesn't win. I don't know. But who am I? I'm a nobody from nowhere, so I'm just a fan that loves it.
No, you've got a valid point, and to your point, you are important, obviously, because if we don't have the fans, we don't have the supporters, then the show wouldn't have lasted past one season. So,
right.
I give it up to the fans as well, because it's because of the fans that it became the phenomenon that it did. Reina, I met her on set, and she's just phenomenally talented, but she's also very sweet. And
Yes.
there's a part of her that is kind of shy, and she suffers from a little bit of social anxiety sometimes. I think that that is misunderstood sometimes as maybe being standoffish, but she's not. And
Yeah.
that's just my interpretation because I'm like that. Like I
Yeah.
get really uncomfortable around big crowds, and I'm at heart kind of a shy, kind of awkward dude
Yeah.
who kind of likes being on his own, but I've learned to become an extrovert, over time, just because that's how I need to function in the world. But
Yeah.
I get what you're saying because she's a phenomenal martial artist, right? And it'd be great if you just saw something that was a little bit more like, wow. And to her credit, wow, what a bitch she was in that. And when she got her teeth knocked out, I know that she's a nice person. And when she got her teeth knocked out, I was like, yeah. And then I was like, oh, wait. I know her, but I get what you're saying.
In a fiction, in a very fictional way, I just don't believe Tori can beat her. Like, I just don't believe it any day of the week. Like, because we see her as this phenomenal, like, wow, look at this. I mean, and she's phenomenal. And you throw in the stunt doubles, and they've really set the stage. But I don't know. I would have liked to see like a disappointing, like a great fight. But sometimes the good guy doesn't get it. Sometimes, or the good girl doesn't get it. Sometimes.
I would agree with that. And the thing is that sometimes a person can win not necessarily by superior technique, but by grit.
Mm,
Sometimes somebody wants it bad enough. I mean, arguably Rocky Balboa, he's not, he doesn't have the best boxing technique, but he's got grit and he doesn't give up. So, you could argue in Tori's favor for that. But, in terms of like martial arts to martial arts, if you look at Reina's technique, she's got flawless technique, right?
mhm.
But that's part of our job. We were hired to make the actors believably look good, right? And so, it's like, look, I've been doing martial arts for over 50 years now as a student, right?
Wow.
I come in, and my job is to make Daniel LaRusso look like he can take care of me. And so I've got my hair that's flying, and he hits me, and at the end of the day, Ralph looks like an action star, right? And so I'm doing my job, and it's like, okay, real life is real life, but let's see if we can make this good, and
Yeah.
I think Reina does a really good job with that, especially considering, this is like, I think her first big movie, and but I had heard of her on the internet. She had made a name for herself on Instagram and, on YouTube. Everybody, I think that's how she was discovered, because it was kind of like, you got to see this girl,
Yeah, she's unreal. My last question is this. So Karate Kid Legends is coming out in a few weeks, right? So I worry that this universe could end up like Marvel. Like Marvel was giving us movies where it's like people were like, okay, I'm Marveled out. I'm superheroed out. Not, I mean, not like where they hate it, but it's like, just we need a break. Do you think that there could be too much Karate Kid? Like, do you think it could ever get to a point where it's like, all right, let's let it breathe a little bit, and then let's kind of continue, because right now we're going right to Karate Kid Legends, and it's right. Consider it's right after Cobra Kai. This isn't like a separate universe. This isn't like a different story. Well, it might be a slightly different story, but there's, I'm sure there's going to be surprise cameos. But what do you think? Do you think there's ever too much? How do you fix that? How do you make sure that it's, people will always love Cobra Kai and the Karate Kid, but too much of anything is not great, right?
Too much of anything is not great. The problem with Marvel was that, they were, same with Star Wars, right? It was just like, okay, guys, it's kind of
Star
funny
Wars 2, yeah, Star Wars 2, yeah.
when something is a little bit more scarce, you appreciate it more. But when you oversaturate it, all of a sudden now it's like, okay, the storylines are weaker. They can take some of your favorite characters, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, like, I'll give you an example. Like, my favorite characters going into, like, like Boba Fett. I was so happy they brought him back, but then in his own series, it was kind of like,
Yeah.
Obi-Wan, Ahsoka Tano, right? Han Solo is just like, oh, come on, guys. These are my favorites. Leave them alone. Bring them back, but leave them alone. I don't know if, I think the timing of Karate Kid, this new movie with Jackie Chan, is probably good. It's riding on Cobra Kai. I think, though, if they go forward with spin-offs and a sequel to this, then we may start getting into the territory of, okay, this is too much.
Yeah.
really too much. And the Japanese have they do series. They'll make a series. They have a storyline, and then when it's done, it's done. Story's done. That's the end of the show. In the West, sometimes it's like, hey, let's keep going. Let's milk it for as long as we can. And then when the fans start to lose interest because the movie sucks, then it's like, okay, guys, it's time to put it away because we're not able to make any money anymore. It's like, I just concentrate on making good story.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
Less is more, right? I think you can do too much. I think we're right at that point where end it with Karate Kid Legends, and then let's take a break for a while.
Yeah. That's a great answer. The best Star Wars show, I don't know if you've seen it, is Andor. It is so, like, you don't even have to love Star Wars. It's just great storytelling, like you're talking about. What do you think about this, William? Do you think it would have been, I'm so happy for Jackie Chan, because this is a man who's given his life to cinema, right? Like, he's busted his ass. It would have been nice to see him like a cameo in Cobra Kai, knowing that this could lead somewhere else. I don't know. That's just me being a wishful thinking fan. What do you think about that, William?
It kind of would have been a nice Easter egg for the fans to kind of like, prepare them, kind of get them ready to, go into the Karate Kid Legends. That might have been kind of a cool cameo.
Yeah. You seem like such a great teacher. Like, your students must think the world of you. What's around the corner for you? Throw out any social media you want, William. The name of your dojo, whatever you want to say. I'll wrap this with your words.
Okay, well, I'm here at the Kaizen Dojo. Kaizen is a Japanese word that means continual improvement, and we're in Torrance, California. I've been here for 13 years, and this is home, and this is where I get to teach kids how to empower themselves, and then hopefully pass that on. I want kids to be healthy, happy, and successful, and more importantly, I want kids and adults to be so strong and know themselves so well that nothing anybody can ever say to them can ever make them forget who they truly are. That's what I do here. My Instagram is at William Christopher Ford, and would love to have you guys follow me. And it's just been a great pleasure being here. Thank you so much. I've had so much fun, and I hope we get a chance to do it again. I got a couple of projects in the works. So one is a small project that's kind of close to my heart. I'm actually starting a podcast called The Beginner's Mind Journey. And it is 2 hours of deep conversation with some cool people. And what we're trying to do is create, connection and community through cool conversation. And my first guest, we already shot the first episode, was Brandon H. Lee, who plays Quan.
Oh, nice.
And we had an excellent conversation right here in the dojo, and it's already filmed. And we're probably going to release it, look for it on YouTube at the end of May. And then I hope to do maybe 9 or 10 more of these with various people. Daryl Vidal is a good friend of mine. Ron Thomas, they've expressed interest in being on there. Thomas Ian Griffith would be a great one, and I have his number, but he gets really busy and he's not always able to commit. But that would be an amazing conversation that I haven't given up on, but I'm really hoping that Thomas will do it. And I think the fans will really love that one.
William, how wonderful is Brandon? How wonderful is Brandon? Like, isn't he
such a sweet guy? He's just such a sweetheart. He's so he's very down to earth and respectful. And he and I connected over a book that I had. I had a book with me called The Obstacle's the Way by Ryan Holiday, and it kind of is Ryan's take on Stoicism and the teachings of Marcus Aurelius. Real practical stuff, but digestible.
Yeah.
And I had this book with me, and it's like, oh, you're reading The Obstacle is the Way. I have that book. That's one of my favorite authors. And Brendan and I connected in Atlanta over this. And then, found out he lived in LA. And I said, dude, I'm doing a podcast. Do you want to come down and be my guest? And, Brendan's one of the guys that actually return my text, the misconception is that I'm friends with everybody on Cobra Kai. And it's like, look, most of them, I don't have their numbers. The numbers that I have, there are a few people that I've texted that just do not text me back or acknowledge that they received my text. I'm like, okay, well, I guess I know where I stand with this person. But Brandon is definitely one. You text him, he will text you back, and he's really good at communicating, and he's just the best. And I wouldn't say that if it wasn't true.
No, 100%. So yeah, I'll be a fan. I'm in. So William, I wish you all the best, and I thank you for giving me this time tonight. It means so much to me.
I've had a great time. Thank you so much. And, just let me know how I can support you in the future. I love what you're doing, and just keep doing you. And I think that what you do is important work.
Oh, you're a good man. Thank you, William. I appreciate it.